Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football cast, and it's the last show of the season for us here on EP. It has been an absolute delight to take you down Nostalgia Avenue, Memory Lane for another series. And joining me for this last episode, which is going to be really, really special, is, of course, my co-host, Paul. Paul, it's been quite a year, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. Season 1 was brilliant, or so I think, and certainly some of the listeners seem to think so. Back when we recorded season 1, season 2, I think, has been bigger, better, and thoroughly enjoyable. It's gone fast, but we've recorded a heck of a lot of content in that time. We've written a lot of things, we've published a lot of things, we've spoke to some great guests, we've been very kindly given copies of books and been able to talk about them and review them. And we've also, been able to meet some great people along the way. It's been a brilliant season. And, look, I'm sad that season 2 is coming to an end, but I don't know if you'll feel the same. Just need to recharge my batteries so that season 3 can be even bigger and better than season 2 was, and not to go like, Ange Postecoglou, but season 3 will be better than season 2,
A very good reference there as well, Paul. Good one to finish on. And it is timely as well. And we're not ending the season here for this specific reason. But obviously, on day of recording, we are 1 week away from the beginning of the World Cup. There's going to be a few late nights involved. My nights maybe be later than others because I'm following Scotland, whose games are at 2 a.m. and 11 a.m. respectively. And we'll see where we end up if we reach knockout phases. But again, I imagine for a lot of people at home, it's the same scenario when it comes to watching the World Cup in the USA. There's going to be some late nights, but at least you don't have to skip work. That's maybe a positive and a silver lining, which brings us on to this week's subject matter here on El Partido as well, because we thought with it only being a week away, or if you're listening on the main feed and not the Patreon, it's just started, the World Cup, and we wanted to focus on the World Cup from a Spanish perspective. Now, last season, or the last series, we did Los Reyes del Mundo, which was the World Cup winning Spain side of 2010. This time we're going to trail it back 44 years to España 82. And Paul, I'm really excited to talk about this one because I won't claim to be alive around for it. I am merely a young 35-year-old thespian. But 1982 for me, when you look back at the clips, when you look back at the tournament, it is certainly one of my favourites to look back at.
Yeah, like you, I was not born at the time of this. I was born in the 1990s, so this was interesting for me to get a perception of football. I mean, I have been one of these nerds who has gone back and watched all of the. There's the FIFA archive that they published. I think it was about 18 months ago. I've gone back and watched all of the World Cups because I'm a sad case like that. But
there's
this one's definitely up there.
Yeah. There's the FIFA archive. There's if you go on ITVX at the moment, there are World Cup games from tournaments gone past there. The same on the BBC. It's wall to wall old World Cup at the minute, Paul. It's brilliant to see. And if you can watch back España 82, I think we were talking about this the other day, didn't we? In terms of this is possibly the first World Cup that had, the level of access, the television thing. Obviously, it was bigger and better than seasons before it. And it was just an extraordinary tournament that, I think captivated, a truly worldwide audience for. I don't want to say that the World Cup wasn't viewed worldwide beforehand, but when you only used to have tournaments of 13 to 20 teams, was it truly a World Cup? I think the jury will be out on that, but 1982 was a turning point, wasn't it?
I think, it's interesting because obviously, and you see it more so if you go back to the footage. It wasn't necessarily the first World Cup that was in colour, but it was the one that had the expansion, and it just seemed to have a vibrancy. It was filmed in a different style. The live pictures seemed clearer, and it, even though it's 1982, like if you watch back now, and anybody who, like say, like us that grew up in the 90s, I don't think there was too much difference in television picture quality from 1982's World Cup to, like, I guess 2002, when I was in school and they had to wheel the telly in on the big trolley to watch the early kickoff of, was it David Seaman getting beaten by Ronaldinho's free kick at something like 10 to 9 in the morning, and we're all in the school assembly hall. But this had a different feel to it. And in terms of events, like, little like stories and small side quests, I think is what people might refer to them to. This had everything. There's so much to take in with it. In fact, this is a World Cup that there's definitely things you can point to now to say that it changed World Cups to follow. For example, as we'll probably dig into, the was it the disgrace where the West Germans and the Austrians played out a 0-0 at the expense of Algeria. That meant, there was a lot to take in that we'll dig into. So this is it one of the best? I think it's certainly one of the most entertaining, one of the most dramatic, and I've enjoyed going back and watching it all again through the archives. And yeah, it's definitely a favourite.
Yeah, I think it's a favourite for me for just the amount of, like, say, nuances that it had, the way that it operated from previous tournaments. Even if you are watching on YouTube right now, you'll see the posters behind me, and that every host city had a different poster that was, drawn or painted by a unique artist, even down to the mascot, who I'm sure we'll talk about later. But I suppose to take it from the cheery aspect, Paul, maybe to a bit more of a serious place, when we look back at obviously Spain before 1982, so back then the World Cups used to get hosted well in advance. Like, I think nowadays you're looking at about a decade ahead of time. Back then you were 16 years ahead of time. Spain is very much in 1966 when they're awarded the tournament during the 1966 World Cup under the Francoist regime. At the time, obviously, Spain was very different than it is now. And probably similar to the 1978 World Cup, it was sort of like a validation of what the regime wanted to do. An early akin to sports washing is possibly the way I would describe it. And, it was very different because going into that tournament, that was going to be the focus and that was going to be the narrative. But obviously, with Franco passing away in 1975, democratic elections happening, there's still the raw feeling of the attempted coup in 1981. I think that all those events basically meant that there was a liberation of this World Cup. This World Cup could live up to a completely different picture to the one that was going to be sold previously, I imagine.
Yeah, Spain is a very different nation by the time the World Cup takes place compared to when it's awarded the tournament, as you say, due to the regime change. But Spain's still very much emerging, trying to find itself and a new identity at this point. And you're right to say that 1978 was somewhat of a Dictators World Cup, as the book Blood on the Crossbar by, I do apologize, forgot the author's name. It is on the shelf behind me there, and it's by Pitch Publishing. It's a great book. It's one of those sort of, you could have potentially have had consecutive World Cups held in nations where democracy wasn't as prevalent. Now, we're not normally a politically, we don't subscribe to the idea of politicizing our podcast in any way, shape, or form, but we can't not talk about it through the lens of history. and it's important to say that obviously, yes, it was 6.5, 7 years since Franco passed away. And a lot had happened within that time frame, but less than 12 months earlier, there'd been an attempted coup as well. It's Spain is still there's some raw sentiment. There's some I guess there's still questions around as it's going through La Transition. There's questions around the Basque movement with obviously the prevalence of ETA. There's questions around other regional identities, and because let's not forget, under Franco there was the Castilianization, I think is the correct term, of names, language. The regime had woven its way into every aspect of life, and this was a sort of the undoing of that, and it takes time, doesn't it? But there's so much more to it as well, because even if you put aside all of the contextual baggage is the wrong word, but the nuances of Spain in 1982, you've also got 24 or 23 other nations taking part in the tournament that have their own complexities to it. Let's not forget, you had 3 quote unquote home nations at this tournament in England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, at a time where the United Kingdom was still technically at war with Argentina over the Falklands / Las Malvinas Islands in the South Pacific. And in fact, the first game of the World Cup, the day that kicks off, the conflict was still raging. It wasn't until the day after the first game took place that the Argentines surrendered at Port Stanley. And I'm fairly certain it wasn't until like August that year that there was actually a full agreement for cessation of fighting. I may be wrong on that. The Falklands is not necessarily a conflict that is, I don't know, I guess an area of my expertise. And we are obviously speaking from the United Kingdom perspective, which is why I've used the term Falklands there, as that is what the conflict is known as.
I thought it was expertly handled with the slash Las Malvinas as well. So, but like I say, we're not a politically orientated podcast, but it's important rhetoric to understand, because even on the other side of that, you spoke about the home nations being present. No Republic of Ireland at this tournament, but Northern Ireland at this tournament, and obviously the troubles that were happening alongside at the time. You've spoken about ETA and the fact that games were going to be held in the Basque Country as well was, quite a conscientious point, because people were worried about, what kind of effect that would have on the tournament. Whether would this be an opportunity for them to, protest ever so slightly, or look to use those events to advance their own cause. But this is again part of the tapestry that comes with España 82, is that they wanted to make it a tournament for Spain, and in doing that, we had 17 stadiums across 14 cities. You've got to remember, at this point there was only 24 teams. That's almost a stadium per team, basically. You could have had your home stadium if you fancied it. And the fact that we went from 16 teams to 24 teams, it was quite an ambitious undertaking, which obviously pales in comparison to the idea of a 48-team World Cup, which is going to happen this summer. But it was huge for 1982, because, like I say, only a couple of decades beforehand, you were very much limited to 12 teams. In this tournament, you had your first teams from Africa. You had teams making their appearances from the Asia and Oceanic federations, with the likes of, I know New Zealand was one of them. The other one eludes me ever so slightly right now. But, this is, I suppose, what I'm trying to say is the first truly World Cup, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And on the subject of teams that take place, and as I mentioned before, this being a World Cup which actually changed other World Cups to follow, with the kickoff of the final group game taking place at the same time. This was also the last World Cup where the reigning champions qualified automatically. So
Yes, yeah.
before the qualification campaign started, you had Spain guaranteed a place as hosts, but you had Argentina as the reigning world champions from '78, guaranteed a spot. And this for, I'm not sure what conditioned it, but this was the final World Cup where the reigning champions qualified automatically. So it was very different. 24 teams, 14 from UEFA, 4 from South America, 2 from North America, 2 from Africa, and 2 from Asia, as you've mentioned. And actually, interestingly, off the American sides, the North American sides, to go back to what I was saying before about the wider complexities of having countries with their own complications. You had El Salvador and Honduras, who
Yeah.
they had the football war, didn't they?
Yeah.
I think that was 1978-ish, wasn't it, as well?
Yeah.
But that then meant that there was lasting tension between the two countries, and that later gives rise to the El Salvador revolution and civil unrest that was to follow. In fact, I think there's a film called Salvador, which is about I think he's a CIA guy who goes into El Salvador during the revolution, not so much during the football war between Honduras but during the El Salvador revolution. Anyway,
Yeah.
digressing there.
There was a good fact, and I won't claim it as my own because I listened to it on the Football History Boys podcast. We've obviously done a fantastic, from 1930 to till now, basically World Cup series, and on there when they were speaking about this football war between Honduras and El Salvador. And I think at the time they were talking about actually the footballing power of North America was going into this tournament was Costa Rica, who were up there with those two nations. Mm-hmm. But because of the civil war in El Salvador, they sort of refused to travel and said, "Look, FIFA will play it, but we don't want to play it there. There's a civil war going on at the minute. We don't want to be putting ourselves at risk like that." And FIFA then decided, in their ultimate wisdom, well, that's not going to be. You'll have to forfeit the game, and the points were, awarded to El Salvador, and that's how they qualified for the World Cup. So, FIFA in their ultimate wisdom, as per usual, sort of not really coming to their aid on that.
Yeah, I mean that kind of says a lot about FIFA in the mid 20th century. I think it was João Havelange who was the FIFA president. Brilliant book, actually. Another book recommendation. Fall of the House of FIFA by David Conn, which talks all about how FIFA collapsed, with the incident in Switzerland, wasn't it, with Sepp Blatter and company having money thrown at them in one instance, and then the arrests and how it all fell apart, because Platini was also supposed to be his successor. But in that book, he talks about, during the 20th century, how there were some unscrupulous decisions. It's really interesting from another point of view about the commercialization of FIFA World Cups. So obviously we've come to associate World Cups with, and this is where, you can bleep these names out because, they're not paying us for advertising, but, you might be familiar with certain. In fact, I'm not going to do them. I'm just going to give a hint at what they are. A cola brand that is synonymous with the World Cup. A fast food restaurant that is synonymous with the World Cup. And it was like a three-stripe sports brand that was, tends to make a lot of kits for nations at the World Cup. The complexities of how those companies became so involved with FIFA is actually quite fascinating. But again, this is another tangent, so please rein me in now, Nick, and let's get back on track.
No, but I think it serves part of the story, isn't it? Because with the expansion of the World Cup, and obviously with the logistics and the appetite to watch it, that naturally comes. And I think, like you say, with the España '82, that is where we start to see it more often. The infographics on the television, the amount of, Spain was already built to have, loads of advertising boards everywhere and things like that. And, the referees having sponsors on their shirts as well. Beforehand, you just turned up all dressed in black. This tournament, they're dressed to the nines and they've got sponsors and branding on them and things like that. And like you say, to go back to the original point, it truly was a tournament for Spain, because you did have, football in all four corners of it. You were up in Galicia, Riazor and La Coruña. You were down in the southeast in Alicante and the Estadio Martin Valero in Elche. You had the two Madrid clubs, two clubs in Catalonia, San Mamés in Bilbao, down to La Rosaleda in Seville. It was really everywhere. So to get these, the amount of football that we got, and the thing is as well that was great for this World Cup, maybe similar to the atmospheres that we saw in 1966. There's a football infrastructure already. There's fans already, and it's in a central location where, like I say, the majority of teams can attend it. So it was an absolutely brilliant World Cup for that as well, because there was thousands of people, filling these stadiums. I think the crowd for the final exceeded 90,000 people. So it was just a brilliant tournament for that, isn't it? And I think that's the kind of stuff that we like to remember. Certainly, come from that perspective.
Aesthetically, I think everything about it was classy. Obviously, we've talked about the colour, you've talked about the referees, and you mentioned the logo. Obviously, behind you, for anybody watching, Nick's got the poster of the España 82, which I think was it Juan Miro that was the principal artist, I think.
I think of this one, yeah. And then I think depending on the city you went to, they picked somebody else. And I always find it weird so again, putting my Malaga hat on ever so slightly, I was expecting something very, Picasso, or, maybe not too far from what's behind me here. But the one for Malaga is just a guy heading a trophy. And I'm just like, it's not really that good compared to, say, like the, the Seville one or the Zaragoza one or things like that. So I've never really been that tempted, and my aim is eventually in this office, and I'm pointing off camera here, but it's to have all the posters around the walls here. And again, this is an advertisement. If you do want those posters, they're available at Cult Kits at a nice price. And maybe if we clip it, they will give us some advertising. It'd be quite good, wouldn't it? But ultimately, you're absolutely spot on. It had all that colour about it and that vibrancy. And that was summarised with me with the mascot for this tournament. Now mascots have become, during the 80s and 90s, mascots were very important. Not so much now. I couldn't even tell you what the USA mascot looks like because it just hasn't been around. But during the 80s and 90s, your tournament lived and breathed by what the mascot was going to be. I remember the rooster for France 98. I remember I'm going to call it Rubik's Cube Stickman for Italia 90. I'm not too sure what he was.
Yeah.
And obviously with this one, we had Naranjito, which is an orange dress in a Spain football kit. And it's become iconic. You see him everywhere. You see him on teachers. You go to T-shirts, that is, not teachers. You go to Spain and you still see imagery of him just knocking about everywhere. He's iconic, isn't he?
He is, yeah. I don't know. They must have lost the copyright on his image, because the amount of places where you see him cropping up as well. And I just had it like, anybody who's been to Manchester, you go to Affleck's Palace, which is obviously, become somewhat of an institution for selling an eclectic range of clothing and apparel, and I've been in there in the past and I've seen Naranjito on, people's T-shirts, like plain white T-shirts with just him. And I'm thinking, you're a goth. You're not into football, but I mean, I'm sure there are goths that are in.
Goths love vitamin C. That's just a fact.
And also, isn't that a bit bright? But no, it's great. But it's just a very what do you call it? Versatile piece of imagery that you see, But retro's back, isn't it? So
absolutely. And the fun facts around Naranjito is obviously he represents sort of like the citric regions of Spain. We're talking Seville and Andalusia, Valencia, and things like that. So again, it becomes part of it. He was the first inanimate object to be a mascot as well. So previously, you tended to have like lions for the 1966 World Cup. You had, Gauchito, a boy for the Argentinian World Cup. So this was the first inanimate object, and they didn't want to be obvious about it. They could have quite easily chosen a bull for example, for Spain, and had bully this or burro that's a donkey, isn't it? So one of
Yeah.
those for the Spanish Army, but they chose it this way. It's
Terence the
interesting.
Toro.
Yeah, Terence the Toro. But it's interesting you should say about, someone must have got the rights on it, because actually they sold the rights for Naranjito for it was about 1.4 billion pesetas to a British merchandising company. Now, they weren't specific of who this is, but I imagine to this day they are making that 1.4 billion pesetas back tenfold at this range. Because
Yeah.
like you say, you see him bloody everywhere, don't you?
Yeah, and the way it's described like that, was it basically a British one? That could be like Trotters Incorporated. And now I know that might be incredibly condescending, and it may be a really well-respected business, but just the way that you've described that there makes me sound like, some Del Boys said, "I'll buy your orange picture."
Did you know he had his own TV show as
1.5
well?
billion percent. Pardon?
He had his own TV show as well. Like, this is how mega this character is.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that he did. I haven't ever seen any clips of it, but didn't he have a friend that was a lemon? I've seen a still image of
I think
him stood next to a lemon, but
yeah, I think he had an eclectic collection of citrus fruit friends, and the show was called. I'll have to get it up here. Sorry, I think it was called Football in Action or something like that. It was called, and basically he just spoke about going to football games, which you want that from any mascot, don't you? Which I think is absolutely ideal. Yeah, it was called Football en Action. Merchandise, genuine affection, retro shirts, nostalgia this day. It became a symbol of specific optimism for Spain as well. And I think, that lends itself, ironically, Naranjito becomes this, strong visual identity of legacy for España 82, doesn't he? Because like you say, not a lot of people remember the actual logo for the tournament. They remember the orange who could do kick-ups, and it's absolutely brilliant. And, it's stuff like that when you think about it, this is a tournament from 44 years ago, but I would love to see that kind of stuff now. Like I say, I don't know what the logo or the mascot is for the 2026 World Cup. I couldn't even tell you what the one from Qatar was. I think Russia. I can't even tell you what Russia is either. I'd be going back to the cheetah. I think was South Africa, and that's the last mascot I can actually remember with any kind of.
Was Brazil 2014 like a lion with a green mane or something like that? And
I think so. Yeah.
Was Russia a bear?
You'd like to think it would be, wouldn't you? You'd like to think that'd be a thing.
Yeah, I think the Qatar 2022 one was. I think it was supposed to be somebody like a character of somebody in Arabic robes, but I think it kind of.
Yeah.
If it's the one I'm thinking of, I'm sure it got memed as being the Snapchat logo.
Yeah, like a ghost, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, mate. Can I just pause there? My phone is going off. Someone's trying to ring me.
Go
I'll
for
just
it,
be
mate.
2 seconds. Is that all right?
Sure.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. No worries.
I'll just pause it. Well, the mascots will always be, Paul, iconic and legendary, and especially in this era of sort of like 1982 to, I'm going to say 2002 is my sweet spot for mascots. But the actual tournament itself, and it's taken us 28 minutes to get here, such as the hype around España 82, was certainly, some of the best football that you will see. They are some of the best sides that you will see in world football at the time. And 1980s was, really sort of like a christening moment for countries like, Brazil, Argentina. This is the first tournament of Maradona. You've got Socrates at Brazil, who's doing really well. You've got this all-conquering Scotland team who could have done so much better, and that's where I'm going to start again. We arrived with genuine optimism in 1982. We had a team that had Graham Souness in it, Kenny Dalglish, Alan Hansen, top stars for a club like Liverpool, who were just winning everything at the time. Managed by Jock Stein. It was just absolutely incredible, to have the all those nations there. And then you start to look around the room a little bit and you look at Brazil, and you look at that Brazil side who hadn't won a tournament since 1970. And they must have come into this one thinking, this has got to be the year that we wrestle the World Cup back, because their squad was absolutely insane, wasn't it?
Yeah, so Brazil, I mean, that squad was fantastic, wasn't it? Zico, Socrates, Falcao, Eder, Junior. As you say, I think a lot of people have said that this is probably one of the best sides never to have won the World Cup. You know, they played incredible football. I guess as well, like maybe that's one of the things that's made them or made that side more memorable is the fact that they played such attractive football, such good football, and yet fell down. And it kind of, you know, there's always, I mean, this sounds really cliche, but there always seems to be, you know, an extra element of weight to wearing that Brazil shirt, as they say.
Yeah.
But this is an era where, you know, it's post Pele, isn't it? And there's this expectation of Brazil as a nation. I've got a book actually on it, funnily enough, because I seem to have a book on everything. I think it's that one that you can see the green sleeve there.
Yeah.
1982, which is by Stuart Horsfield, I think. It's all about Brazil at the '82 World Cup. One of the best sides never to have won it, and I guess as well, like, you know, maybe that's what sort of are we into Brazil's the day really now, because they don't win it until 1990. No, sorry, 2000.
No, yeah,
94,
1994. Yeah, they don't win it for 24 years, which is always a thing. Like, do you know when you get those Mandela effects? I think they're called, or basically when you think of things that have happened but they actually haven't. And I always assume that, you know, when we talk about, you know, Brazil being the most successful side, you know, at World Cup tournaments ever, I always look at them and say, oh well, of course they must have won at least one World Cup every decade. Surely that's the way it works. But you know, the fact that they went that 24 years,
yeah,
you know, without winning the main trophy is incredible. But it is more incredible when you look at, you know, this team. And I think the irony is, as much as I spoke in our article this week about how brilliant Brazil were in 1994, in comparison to this side during the 1980s that went to España 82 and to Mexico 86, compare that to the side that went to 1994, there wasn't as much love for that side that eventually went on to win the trophy. And certainly, again, in comparison, there wasn't as much love for the 1994 side compared to the one that went to the 1998 final and obviously won 2002 as well. So it's a very weird thing with Brazil, is that they had this, you know, superstar team that you know, obviously described with the likes of Socrates and things like that inside, and it just couldn't quite get across the line. Now, is that because there was something in the head, maybe post Pele or something like that, or were other teams just genuinely, you know, sort of that great at the time as well? Because when you come to think about some of the teams in this tournament, you know, I've just spoken about the Scotland team and the amount of star players that they had. You know, we've got the Argentine side, which has got the likes of Diego Maradona in it as well, and the Italian side as well. Let's not forget, you know, you've got the Italians who, if I remember rightly, I should have researched this at the beginning. I'm pretty sure they went on to win this tournament.
Yeah.
I just need to double check that with myself. But you've also got, you know, Paolo Rossi's redemption arc inside here as well, haven't you?
That's it. Yeah, this is the tournament where you have Rossi, who, you know, from the match fixing scandal, he had not been able to play until very, very close to the World Cup, where it was like, oh, actually, we'll let him back into the side. And he hadn't really played particularly well during this tournament until they get to the game, actually, ironically, against Brazil. And after that game against Brazil is when he just seemed to take things to another level. Of course, this is the same World Cup where, you know, everyone remembers Marco Tardelli's, you know, he's screaming and he's running, that's the winning goal in the final, isn't it? So, but there was this World Cup, like I think I said it at the start, every sort of team had their own quirk to it. I mean, Q8, for example, at this World Cup, you know, there's obviously some tensions in the golfers. There seems to be, you know, almost on a bit of a cycle, really, don't they? Yeah. But Q8 scored, I can't remember who scored it, but in the group stage, they scored an absolute rocket of a goal. It might have been the only goal they scored actually at that tournament, but yeah. everybody just had, there was just every team had something interesting about them.
Yeah. It was a unique tournament that way, wasn't it? And like you say, when you look at this hat trick from Rossi against Brazil to sort of like get himself, really back onto the main stage, and the fact that then it opens the scoring in the final. And let's not forget, to this day, he denies any wrongdoing, in that match fixing
Yes.
scandals and things like that. Speaking of which, I'm not going do we call this match fixing or do we not? I'm not too sure. We obviously have the disgrace of Gijón, a real tarnish on, not just on the World Cup itself, but sort of like by association has really scraped, the stories that get told at El Molinón. And you get this, decision of the final group game between West Germany and Austria, where, West Germany, need to win, and I think then ironically Austria needed to lose as well, or something like that. And essentially they play out this sort of like agreed match ending.
A point would have, a point worked out for the two of them, and obviously, this is at a time, a less politically correct time, so you can imagine what the newspapers were like about two nations that were formerly very closely aligned in the earlier part of the 20th century. There's some headlines, particularly from the British newspapers, which were, as you'd expect. But it was, I mean, it doesn't distract from the fact that, it was pretty disgraceful. And, actually from Paolo Rossi and his denial of being, a match fixer, it's a nice segue into an agreed 0-0 draw that, meant that West Germany and Austria could progress at the expense of Algeria, an Algeria side who had beaten West Germany earlier on in the tournament. And like I said at the start, this is one of the reasons why now the final group stage game is played at the same time, because we don't want a repeat of this. There's quite a few things. I mean, obviously, like the West Germans were a very strong footballing nation during the second part of the 20th century, and I think it was 1974 they had played East Germany at the World Cup and lost 1-0 to Jürgen Sparwasser's goal, which I just felt like mentioning just to balance things out a little bit there, to be honest with you, more so than any other historical reason.
Well, the fun facts that I have about West Germany is that they were so Spain actually wanted to host the 1974 World Cup originally. And again, how different would that have been? Sort of like with Franco in his latter stages before his death type thing. But they agreed with West Germany that they would host it, and then basically, Spain would get a free run at 1982, for example. So again, there's all these slight nuances, isn't there? And obviously, when you look culturally, West Germany and Austria, very similar cultures. That it did feel like, what the Germans refer to as, and I'm going to absolutely butcher German here, so I do apologize. It's called Nicht-Angriffspakt von Gijón, which is essentially like the non-aggression pact of Gijón. Essentially, but like you say, it raised a lot of questions about ethical and tactical discussions, and and that is why, like you say, we do have this rule change that stemmed from this World Cup, where all group games must be played at the same time. But never sleep on that Algeria team, though, because like I say, they will feel unjust in this, the fact that they were sort of essentially cheated out of it, because not only did they beat West Germany, this is their first appearance at a World Cup. It is the first African nation to beat a European power at a World Cup as well. And, that is why it ultimately stung so much. They were really cheated out of it after achieving so much in such a short time, didn't they?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think this is, Algeria, I think people nowadays will probably be more familiar with Algeria's presence at World Cup. Certainly, they're at the 2026 World Cup. They were at the 2014 World Cup, and they've had a few deep runs into the African Cup of Nations as well. And we've started to see over the last 15, 20 years a lot more Algerian players in the English Premier League, in the leagues across Europe, certainly in La Liga, in the Bundesliga, and in Serie A. But this was really a breakthrough for the African continent on the footballing scene, and I suppose as well that kind of, in my opinion, it adds to the sort of the sadness around the manner in which they're eliminated, because it's almost like, you have every right to feel like you've been done an injustice there,
Yeah. And West Germany weren't for making friends this tournament at all, were they? They really were the absolute bastards of this tournament, because obviously we've also got this incident of West Germany against France in the semi-final down in Seville. One of it, and like you say, if you do go back and watch these on the BBC or the FIFA archives, this is one of the best semi-finals you'll ever watch at a World Cup. But we do have this incident where the German goalkeeper, Harald Schumacher, he collides with Patrick Batterson, and he collides him so violently that he knocks Batterson unconscious. He then has to go to hospital, requiring hospital treatment on a cracked vertebrae. He's lost some teeth. He's got cracked ribs. The man's been violently assaulted. You know what the punishment is for that, Paul?
A goal kick.
Not even a yellow card.
Yeah,
a man that he didn't even record them a free kick. Schumacher did offer to pay for Batterson's dental work afterwards, which seems like a bit of a
that's insult to injury, literally. It is definitely something that I've got to be honest with you. I have watched that bit back several times, because it doesn't matter what era you're in, how that is not a form of ABH,
like Don Revy Lee style football, isn't it? And
if the entire team went through one player, it's like, it was horrendous. And you can, there is actually a photo, because there was also this issue where there wasn't a stretcher readily available to take him off the pitch, and they had to improvise and stuff. But there's actually a photograph that is one of the more high quality ones where, and I can't remember. I know it was by a fairly well known photographer. That you can see what appears to be one of his teeth on the, just very faintly on the blade of grass as he's laying. Awful. But yeah, it was a goal kick in the end.
It was a goal kick in the end, and like I say, the furore from this, obviously West Germany go on to win this game on penalties, isn't it? If I remember right.
Yeah.
A French newspaper did run a poll after this on who is the most disliked German in France, and Schumacher comes first. Adolf Hitler comes second, if that if that helps sort of like put into perspective what kind of effect this had on this French national team.
That is up there with, do you remember, like, this might be me showing my age now, but like I say, I was born in the 90s, but like when at the end of every year they'll do like a roundup of the year and stuff like that. I'm fairly certain it was the countdown to the millennium, and they were reflecting on, the last however many years, and they were going through it and they were showing clips every day of the week for like the final week of the year was, it's Y2K bug this, Y2K, but let's look back at it. And what were some of the dark moments of this past century? And obviously they show some black and white images of, military stuff, that because you could, pretty much every decade there was something. And then there was a poll when it was the days when you had to ring up and vote, and it was Jerry leaving the Spice Girls was like one of the top 10 dark moments in UK history. That's like Schumacher in that poll. One worse than Adolf, It's like,
I know, and a slight reprieve for obviously the murderous dictator there, but that must have been some. like you say, for that kind of pain, because it does lead to
Yeah,
this, absolute French heartbreak. And again, we speak about the quality of the Brazil squad, for example. This is a France squad that is, one of the best in the world. You've got
yeah,
Platini, Gires, Tigana, uh, Rosateu, and so many other people. And the fact that they go out on penalties at this World Cup, the first World Cup game that is ever decided by a penalty shootout as well, by the way,
yeah,
it really left a mark on French supporters as well. And this is, I think, at the point where it changes French football ever so slightly. And
yeah,
sort of similar to what we've seen with the England football team, as much as it pains me to say, over sort of like the last 2 decades, France basically look inwards and say, right, how do we get better than this? And that is when they reach out to, elements of the francophone and things like that, and they start to, obviously in a right manner, start to involve a lot more players of BAME heritage behind them as well. Bringing people in that have migrated to France, for example. So it's a massive wake up for a real sleeping giant as far as
yeah.
France are concerned. Because, like you say, at this point they'd never won a World Cup. They'd had this best side ever, yet they still couldn't get past some of the top teams in Europe and around the world. So
Well,
it was
that's
an
it.
interesting wake up call.
Yeah, they do play nice football this tournament. In fact, the ball that leads to the injury to Battiston is Battiston, sorry, is played by Michel Platini. And if you saw a midfielder play this through ball like he does, that obviously leads to the keeper chart. If that was played today, you'd be like, "Oh wow, what a brilliant assist!" It was like Kevin De Bruyne-esque. And I, I appreciate that Michel Platini has, perhaps you need to distinguish him between him as the man in a suit versus him versus man in a football kit. But they played some great football there. And I've seen, because I fall down these rabbit holes whenever we're doing research for these episodes and stuff like that, because I do something, but I actually saw one of the I can't remember whether it was the actual FIFA the FIFA account or like a BBC one or something, but one of these videos was on Twitter, and it was just like the sadness of, like, like a 90-second clip of like the sadness of the French to lose this semi-final. And some French guy put, "You English had Italian 1990 semi-final loss. This was our 1990 semi-final loss." Like, well, fair enough. So it's where it is in the French psyche at the time,
Yeah. Like you say, you look back and you think of that, hand of God moment, for example.
Yeah.
Having your player absolutely, hit by a bus, for want of a better word, and essentially assaulted in front of the world audience, probably sits at that kind of level with France as well. And certainly they've come back and shown they're not going to allow it to happen again.
Yeah.
Maybe just to flick through straight to the finals. Obviously, West Germany do make the final. They play against Italy.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of redemption slightly here for the people who don't want to see West Germany win this tournament. They lose it 3-1. Paolo Rossi, breaking the deadlock. You've got Marco Tardelli's second goal, with that really iconic celebration that is now one of the most memorable in football history, where he's screaming down the touchline. And then you've got Alessandro Altobelli making it 3-0, and essentially the game is dead from that point. There's also an interesting fact that we also get our oldest World Cup player at this point. Dino Zoff comes on. He's 40 years old. I don't think we've ever seen that beaten. I think we might see it this year with, I think, one of the players from Cape Verde or Haiti. I can't remember which one it is, but I think they've got quite an old goalkeeper who might be making an appearance, to be fair. But Italy claimed their third
Is it the
title.
Mexico goalkeeper? Sorry to interrupt. Isn't that the Mexico
Yes,
goalkeeper?
it might be Guillermo Ochoa, actually. Yeah. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
he's now over 40, isn't he? But yeah, his sixth
Yeah.
tournament, this one as well. And to be fair, I can't remember a tournament without him. But Italy claimed their third title, their first since 1938. And you may have noticed in all, obviously, this talk about Brazil, without the talk about France, West Germany, etc., we've not mentioned Spain once in this chat. And that is because Spain actually don't do too well in this ordinarily, and it seems to be quite an interesting thing. Home nations do tend to do quite well with the swell of support behind them. Let's not forget again, you look at 1994, USA making it to the knockout stages quite unexpectedly. You've got France 98 where they go on and win it. Germany in 2006, end up going quite far too. So the fact that Spain didn't do well here is very interesting. And again, it's not because they were a poor side. They've got some really, really good players at this time and really beautiful Adidas kit as well. But the fact that they stumbled in the group stage, they drew against Honduras, they just about beat Yugoslavia and then lost to Northern Ireland. And then they drew all 3 games in the second group stage, against West Germany and England. And, the respite will be, well, technically we didn't lose a game, but also you didn't progress anywhere near what you should have done, especially with being the home nation. And it is probably the worst performance by a home nation in World Cup history, which is such a shame because how good would it have been to have a strong Spain going deep into the tournament on home turf?
That it would have been great. I mean, this is as well. It's worth remembering that Spain, back at this stage, they weren't the Spain that people our age and younger would know, would think of. Spain in the the 70s, 80s were quite a physical side, quite a traditional in the way that they played football. They were almost an English side, in how they played. It was the days before Cruyff had revolutionized the way that the Spanish nation sees football as being this beautiful, attracting thing. And I know there's people other than Cruyff that have contributed to the beautiful football played in Spain, but they were not playing beautiful football all of their lives. It was the 70s and the 80s where, and I think some people might even argue the early 90s were quite the Spanish teams are quite turgid usually, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Up until 2008, I would say that you were pretty much there. You had those players in the late 90s, the likes of Raúl and Mendieta and Guardiola. You had the components there to play some really nice football, but they were still very, for want of a better word, very much designed around 4-4-2 type thing. And it was only when, like say, they started to sort of like revolutionize their sport at a grassroots level through the academies like La Masia and things like that, they really started to get, this swell of world-class quality players. And the same happened in Germany as well, going through the early 2000s too.
Das Reboot.
Das Reboot, yeah. And it's just like, I think here you've got this this country who, as far as football's concerned, Spain has always had a complicated relationship with football. It is the national pastime. It is, the love of the game. But I think because of the culture that had been around it, the interference that had been around it as well, you never really saw the very best of it come through. There were decisions being made about Spanish football, especially on an international level, which meant some of those superstars and some of those best players that that represented Spain couldn't represent them on the worldwide stage. And there is a hangover effect to this because, like you say, you don't see, some of the best potentially Basque players or Catalan players or Galician players coming through in this. It is still very much centered around, those, big football powerhouses. And I think that's the thing that, is the oxymoron about España 82 is that it was the tournament that, encapsulated the whole of Spain, but Spain was still trying to find its identity, trying to find its way and trying to get, they say that Spain is a nation of nations, don't they? Rob Potts said that on our last podcast. It was still trying to do that. And maybe, if we would had this tournament 10 years, 14 years later, it would have been a different outcome. You would have had maybe a much more organised Spain, a much more difficult to play against Spain. But I think at this moment in time, it is just a reflection of where the Spanish psyche is. Almost as if there was a fear of failure, which is maybe why they were so reserved in comparison to some of the, really explosive and attacking football that we saw from the likes of Brazil, Argentina, and West Germany, for example. And I think that's obviously that's a massive shame, Paul. Really, isn't it? Because as we say, it would have been great to see them go far in this tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said before as well that this might be the worst performance by a host nation, and I think that's such a heavy accusation to level. But let's think about it in terms of what the opportunity they had in front of them was like, and how things materialized. There is room to argue that. Now, I know some people might jump on and say, well, Qatar did nothing, or South Africa. I mean, to be fair, South Africa, I think gave a good account of themselves in 2010. Would losing 7-1 at home in a semi-final be a really bad showing by Brazil in 2014?
I think they argue that might be the case. To be fair, yeah, that's a very good point. I think the difference is there with Brazil, is, and I'm trying to cast my mind back to it. That result is obviously a blemish.
Yeah, because they had played brilliantly up until that game. The trouble is that they had played to Neymar all tournament, and I'm not getting on his case. I know there's Barca fans that still love the guy and everything like that, but they became a one-player team to an extent, and that's what cost them.
Yeah, and some argue that they still have been. I say, they've never truly managed to replicate. Especially that side of the 90s and noughties that obviously were the dominant international football team and the reference point that everyone went to, and that game is a blemish. And I think, like you say, up until then they did play really, really well. I think with Spain in 1982, it was just meh all the way through. But again, I don't think that is down to necessarily the team that they had. There was good players in there, but they weren't the same level as a Socrates or a Platini or anyone else that we could possibly put in that category. So it's obviously a shame. And the thing is, 1982 still endures the entire football conversation as well. Like you say, it is a matter of being nostalgic. That's why we're talking about it now. But there is an argument to say it was genuinely quality to watch.
Yeah.
And, it was a big tournament of what ifs. What if, like I say, Schumacher hadn't almost killed a Frenchman? What if, Austria had actually taken the game to Germany? How far could Algeria have gone? What if Rossi hadn't made the Italy squad? What if he was deemed not match fit enough after a 2-year ban to be part of the team? It very much feels like it could have gone completely a different way. And that's where the mysterious nature and the intrigue of this tournament really sits for me. And, if Brazil had won it, what would we have seen for the rest of the century? Would we have seen them go again in 86, win it in 1990? It's very much an enigma, this tournament for me, which is where the intrigue sits.
Yeah, definitely. It's got it all. There's obviously there's so much about it that, and I think the word you used earlier just then was endure. And I think the aesthetics endure because we've spoke earlier on in the episode that the posters, Naruhito, the branding, all of it still looks cool today.
Mm-hmm.
The stadiums predominantly, so El Molinón and Elche's ground and Hercules' ground, pretty much untouched. Rosaleda, they were upgraded and enhanced and utilized for the tournament, and to an extent they've not really changed much since, which is both a testament to the World Cup but also says and speaks to other things. Whereas obviously, like the Camp Nou and the Santiago Bernabeu have obviously changed dramatically compared to others. But with the exception of Mestalla, those other stadiums that I mentioned have lasted really well, and there is still elements to it when you around them that point to that World Cup. We still talk about the Tardelli celebration. You see it at every World Cup montage. It's in there. The Schumacher Battiston challenge, I don't know, maybe that doesn't get as much coverage because it's perhaps a little bit too graphic, but that is memorable. The rule change that we've had for the group stage, the hosts having to go through qualification, the reigning champions having to go through qualification, Dino Zoff's last World Cup. There's just so much to it. It had everything. And to go back to what you said as well, like this World Cup was not the first World Cup in colour, but it felt like this was the first World Cup in colour. And I'm saying this to somebody who won't want it, and this is somebody who's basing it on my interpretation of having watched the bits that are, because I say I am a Sado. All of the footage that they've got from the various World Cups that are available, I've watched those matches because that's just what you do sometimes.
We're in our mid-30s and parents. That's what we do with our evenings. That's just the way it is.
When, my wife is like, what are you doing? Nothing. She's like, what are you doing? I'm just watching a black and white football match from, the 1956 World Cup. It's just what we do,
Yeah. There's almost a temptation sometimes to admit that you may be doing something slightly more rude, potentially.
I think honestly,
it might be easy to explain.
Yeah, if I wasn't watching a match from the 1958 World Cup, I think she's more disappointed by that than if it had been something more,
risque.
Yeah. But it's had that lasting impression. This book, just to get back on point, so to speak, it has had that last impression, and it I think cards on the table. I think the '86 Mexico logo is one of the coolest World Cup logos. But the Spain aesthetics for '82 was so good. I think it's a trendy one, and I haven't mentioned it. I mentioned it a few weeks back, but this is the World Cup where all those England fans and Scottish fans travelled down in cars, car sharing, living in cars. Bob Mortimer was cutting people's hair in exchange for fried egg sandwiches outside football stadiums whilst he was watching England. That's if you believe his story on Would I Lie to You? And
I do.
Yeah, I do.
Very much in his wheelhouse, to be fair. And as I put on Twitter today, Graham Hunter shared some brilliant stories about his basically. He hit fuck it moment and decided he was going to the World Cup to follow Scotland, and went through some incredible stories as he made his way to Alicante, over land, not in the air on this point. But I think the big thing to take away from España '82, it was very much, it was about a country that was reinventing itself. It was opening itself to a global audience. It was showing that, we are a democracy. We are a country that's trying to heal. And, the audience couldn't believe what they were treated to in terms of how beautiful the football was, how chaotic it was. And, we speak a lot about how much we enjoy that on this podcast, being nostalgic. You don't get that anymore. And I very much get this sentiment at the moment where a lot of people, they're not excited about the 2026 World Cup. They're not excited about the prospect of, staying up until 11 o'clock at night. Whereas, look at, as we were talking about the World Cup in Japan and South Korea, sitting and watching, England play at 7 o'clock in the morning, and your parents taking you to school at the very first thing, and the teachers wheeling it out. I don't think you're going to get that with this tournament. I don't think we're going to see sort of the same sort of love-ins that we get now. The ticket prices have been an absolute joke. The logistics around the stadiums have been stupid, like, getting a train from Manhattan to New Jersey is going to cost you $200, even though on any other regular day it's going to cost you $7 or $15 or whatever it was. And the biggest crime of all, Paul, is the fact that they are not holding the final at the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City. They're holding it in an NFL stadium in New Jersey. That's fucking criminal in my book, and very much says exactly where the World Cup is nowadays, which is why we want to go back to an España '82 or a Mexico '86 or Italia '90, because they're just so much better, aren't they?
They are. I think that is a good point for us to wrap up the episode, wrap up the season. But I just want to say, look, obviously, when we look back, we are heavily biased to, the days of but well, football was better. But if you are watching the World Cup, regardless of who you're supporting or how big or small your national team might be in terms of how confident you feel, or even if you're just watching it just to hope England lose or just to hope so or you just want to watch it for what it is, I hope you enjoy it, because we have to wait another 4 years till the next one, so make the most of it. And who knows, maybe in what are we now, 44 years time, somebody somewhere, I wouldn't think it'll be us, but maybe there is a podcast out there that is going to be looking back on 2026 World Cup, and you want to be able to say you were there or that you remember it.
Yeah,
there's a lot to take in.
There is a little glimmer of hope for me, and obviously I know that and I'm sure the listeners have grasped now that despite my accent, I am an ardent follower of Scotland, and I watched the Iron Brew advert today, which had Subo singing on top of the Forth Bridge with John McGinn about how we're made from girders and things like that. And that actually got me quite a little bit excited for the World Cup. I won't lie, I was like, oh, I'm actually buzzing now. I actually don't mind waking up at 2 a.m. to watch us play Haiti. So that bug will hit in for definite. And you've just said we're not going to see it again for 4 years. However, Paul, where's it going to be in 4 years' time? We're going to have it in Spain, and obviously shared with Portugal and Morocco as well. And I think that's going to be a tournament that we can really get behind. Yes. So hopefully we're still podcasting then, because I no doubt we'll have some specials on that. I can only say thank you to you, Paul, for helping me get through this series too, for keeping me company on these lonely Thursday nights up until silly o'clock, talking about all these fantastic stories. Thank you to all our guests this season as well. We've had such a brilliant guest list, from Brendan Madden, we've had Miguel Pereira again, Guillaume Balaguer, Rob Potts, so many, and apologise if I've not mentioned you. We could have gone on all night mentioning all our guests. It's been absolutely wonderful, and Paul, you've been along it with me side by side. It's been an absolute pleasure for this season.
Oh yeah, Nick, I've enjoyed every moment of it, and even though on this particular series there's been one or two episodes that I've had to miss for work commitments or being at football matches or various other things, it's enabled me to have the opportunity of listening from the other side of the microphone, and I've enjoyed them just as much as, well, almost as much as being able to talk to you myself, because it's not quite the same just listening. So because I'm talking to myself, I've got my headphones in and I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, yeah, Nick, but and then I realize, no, I'm not here with you.
It's not the time.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to more next season. We've got so much that we've been talking about off camera that we've got planned. Definitely people need to stick around and pay close attention over the coming months to what we put out and stuff, because season 3 is definitely going to bring people more of the things that they so far enjoy, and plenty more things that we hope and we think they'll enjoy, but things that we're also really excited about and we're going to enjoy ourselves talking about as well. So
absolutely. It's all still to come in season 3. We've already got, Paul, our first guest lined up. I've not told you this yet, but I will tell you off camera not to ruin the surprise. But yeah, stick with us. We're still going to be doing stuff over on social medias and Substack throughout the summer, so the articles will still be written. Mm-hmm. We'll still have, we're going through a very change you might have seen on our social medias. We're very making it World Cup focused, so we've had some brilliant videos go up on there of Dennis Bergkamp scoring goals and Roberto Carlos, rattling them into the top corners for Brazil. So give us a follow on there to keep up to date with all the podcasts and shows. We'll be releasing some sort of reminders of our best of season 2 as well throughout the summer, so you can go back and listen to those too. But ultimately, what I want to say before we dial off from this call is thank you to you guys at home. Without you, El Partido does not exist. The listeners, which just keep getting bigger and better. The interactions we get with you, the conversations that we're having is brilliant. And I can't thank you enough for keeping me sane from the mundane nature of my day job by doing this on the evenings as well. So again, a massive round of applause to you guys. Muchas gracias. And a big thank you to you guys at home. But Paul, I hope you enjoy your holiday. I hope you enjoy your summer. I'm sure we'll speak in between now and then.
Yeah.
But
do you know what it's going to be? As soon as we jump off here, we're just going to be texting each other anyway. So,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And like you say, we've got big plans for season 3. So stick with us. We'll be back in August. We'll see you then. So it's hasta luego from me. And we'll see you soon.
Yeah.